I spent 1 week with the new iRacing Oval refresh to answer the question, has it fixed oval racing or at least made it better? And if you're looking for the quick and dirty answer because I didn't make this topic into a YouTube short, I'll just give it to you. I think it's pretty good. I think it does what iRacing advertised it to be, and I think it's a little more effective than most people thought it would be going into it, but I think that there are some places where it shines more than others. So let's go down the list of all of the tracks that I tried out the new refresh on and talk about what it did to them and how it changed the racing, because the racing has changed. So far, most of my experience has come with the Xfinity car because of that 13th week Xfinity Series challenge, but I will get to the ARCA car later because of course I am the ARCA farmer. And before we get started, I wanted to invite you guys to join me at my live streamed event of Drive Smart to Daytona first race at Daytona tomorrow, December 14th at 8 p.m. Eastern. If you haven't heard about it yet, Drive Smart to Daytona is an event that me and Drive Smart are putting on that's going to be really fun, and the winner is going to Daytona as a VIP guest for the Xfinity race. And if you want to participate along at home, we have the Drive Smart Fantasy Challenge going. So if you click the link in the description and pick your team, the winning picked team in the Fantasy Challenge will win $150, second place $100, and third place $50. And it's free to enter, so you might as well check it out. The first races I did were at New Texas in the Xfinity car, and this was a very interesting one to start out on because it showcased how the oval refresh works in some situations, but just makes things a bit more of a nuisance in other situations. And I'm talking about the different corners because in turn 3 and 4, that was the first time over a course of about 20 laps where I felt, wow, things are changing in this corner. I could run the middle line, I could run the bottom line, but then at some points, the bottom line would start to get slicker than you would expect it to be, and moving up a lane would get rid of that slickness. But we get down to turn 1 and 2, and I could not find any speed in any lane besides the first bottom lane. Definitely some people were trying to make other lines work, but when I was driving, I just could not do anything besides get to the bottom. And that's okay because really that's what Texas is supposed to be in 1 and 2. It really is just that dominant of a line. But the problem is when you have that dominant of a line and then it heats up and rubbers up, then instead of having one dominant line that everyone drives, you have that same dominant line, but it's just a lot more difficult to drive on, a lot more slippy, a lot less predictable, and maybe that makes certain aspects of it fun, but personally I was just feeling kind of annoyed by it. Like this line that I'm running, it just feels really crappy every time I go into the corner, but there is nowhere else I can search for because that line is still better than all the alternatives. And the same exact thing happened going into the second race that I did, which was at Darlington. I skipped IRP. I'm sorry, I just wasn't feeling that one. But at Darlington, it has a really distinct single groove in turn 1 and 2. And it had this same thing going on that Texas 1 and 2 had, where you could go on that line and it would just get worse and worse as the run went on. But at the same time, you really couldn't move around because of how much better that line is than all of its alternatives. You really have to stay up by the wall and cut down late. But the longer the race went on, I just couldn't get the car to cut down. I couldn't get the car to really bite on the way up. And I did see a couple people try to stay a bit lower off the wall, and I think there might have been some success there, but it was really negligible if it was. So at the end of the day, we just had one slick line that everyone was trying to survive on, and that's cool in terms of every lap not being the same, but in terms of passing someone, that's a nightmare. You're just hoping that they mess up pretty much. Turn 3 and 4 at Darlington, though, was when I started to see another new thing that I experienced, which was the comeback of diamonding. These Xfinity cars had very loose setups all throughout the week, and the track states were pretty hot as well. So when those combined, it turned out that a lot of my advice that I give to people about entering the corners earlier and trying to hug the bottom, a lot of those became a moot point because the car just wasn't able to engage coming off the corner. One example of this was turns 3 and 4 at Darlington, where I found myself finding a lot of time, especially on the mid and late run, was when I did everything in my power to straighten out the exit. Because with these loose race cars, there wasn't a lot of rear grip to go around, so getting as much of my turn as I can in the middle of the corner, I was able to put the power down a lot more than other people who were seemingly on more conservative lines. In my opinion, this diamond type of line was far better than just sticking to a groove, regardless of what groove it was, high or low. All of those grooves became pretty even, but they all struggled with the same thing, was finding grip on exit. So with that and the track heating up on certain grooves, it was almost like a no-brainer where I was thinking, okay, wait a second. When these grooves get slick, I need to be going as straight as I can off the corner. And that idea really carried over to almost everything I drove from there on out. The next track I drove was Iowa in the Xfinity car, and this one was almost like I'm expecting this to be as multi-groove as possible with this new update, and that's not necessarily what I found. Out of all the tracks I did, I think that Iowa was the most single groove of the ones I tried, which was very surprising. And I think it all boils down to that same thing that I was talking about just now with keeping your rear tire engaged in the track on exit. Because of that, the late apex diamonding type of line at Iowa became much better than everything else over the course of a run. Sure, you could make the top of 3 and 4 and one lane off the top of 1 and 2 work for a few laps, but once that top groove started slicking out, it was almost impossible to run that line competitively, especially in the loose setups. Because so far in these Xfinity cars, we had experienced just loose setup after loose setup after loose setup, and it really exaggerated the effects on corner exit that the dynamic track had. But at the same time, when you rely on a lot of mid-corner stability for lines like right up top, or even trying to get the car to pitch off the bottom, you would lose a lot of time sliding your tires around, and the right rear tire became the commodity of the Xfinity car. And that's not a new thing. That happened a lot with the old Xfinity setup as well, but there were definitely some setups that were super tight. So it was very interesting to see across the board right rear just wearing on all tracks. And what also stemmed from the lack of grip when the track would heat up was corner entries became a lot harder to get the car really pinned on the bottom. So what Iowa really liked with this setup was just entering high, using your brake to trail all the way down to the bottom and just late apex or diamond that corner and have as straight of an exit as possible. It's not the weirdest line. It's definitely been a line that's existed before, but it was a very weird situation where this was the line that was the only line that you could really run. The final Xfinity track that I tried out was Chicagoland, and this is supposed to be the quintessential 1.5 mile track that everyone can run different lanes on. And what I found very interesting about this was that running the top, I believe, was just not good anymore, especially on the loose Xfinity setup. It felt good to rip the wall, but your car would step out so much and you would slide your right rear and put so much heat into it that over the course of the run, you could wear up to 30% more right rear tire than just running a bottom line. But not just the bottom line. The exact line that I'm talking about at Chicago is the same one between Iowa and partially of Darlington, where you want to enter high, use your trail brake to go low, and then late apex with as straight of an exit as possible. This type of corner carried over between all these different track types because of the same issue of there not being a lot of grip on an older track, meaning that you want to straighten out your exits as much as possible. Well, the problem with running by the wall is your exits aren't straight because you always have to be turning the wheel if you're right by the wall. And so you would really struggle with having the rear tire step out at any given point of the corner. And while it felt good in the moment, there wasn't much going on better up top than on the bottom, and you were giving up a lot of rear tire heat because of it. I personally at Chicago ran a 50 laps all just running that late apex bottom line, with the middle line being okay, but only on short spurts. And that's the last thing I want to talk about is the dynamic lines are not good forever. They will go to one place and then go back, and then go to another place and go back. That's what I noticed, because you would start out usually in these tracks in the first 10 or 15 laps, you'd be able just to run bottom, early apexing, like I kind of always say. But then once that heats up, you go to that default late apex line, and that's like your bread and butter. And then if you start losing a little time to somebody running the top, maybe you'll run the top for 2 laps, and then you'll go back to your other line because that part of the track has started to heat up. And then maybe you'll run a couple laps just running in the middle without the late apex because the late apex might be heating up a little too much, but it's usually not that big of a difference. So you can move around. but moving around does not give you significant advantages over a long run. It's almost like a reactionary type thing. It's almost like you have to time yourself to say, okay, I ran this line 3 times. Now it's time for me to run this other line once or twice. And so finally on Monday, I ran my first ARCA race on the oval refresh. And this was a huge difference because this setup was very, very tight and in the track and really engaged in a way that the Xfinity setups were not. So what I saw with the new oval refresh with the ARCA car was that it's almost the same, but a little bit different. The most common high-level strategy in the ARCA races before this oval refresh at most 1.5 miles was to run the bottom for about half the race and then run the top for half the race. Depends on the track, of course, but that's roughly what was good at a lot of tracks. With this oval refresh, it seemed like if you went to the top halfway through the race, you would burn too much tire while you're up there, and then once it heated up, you wouldn't be gaining any time anymore. So being at the top was good, but only on spurts. If you were only there from, say, the last 5 or 10 laps, that was good. If you were there in the middle gaining time in like the middle 10 laps, and then you went back to the bottom for the rest of the race, that was good. But it seems like you just can't be up there the entire time, which you really could in the old days in ARCA. It wasn't technically the fastest thing you could do, but you could do it. But the biggest difference for ARCA with this oval refresh was corner entry. With old ARCA, you really wanted to get to the bottom as early as possible no matter what, and now you can really feel that bottom groove start to slick up in the mid and late run, which again makes that late apex better and an option, and where it never used to be an option in ARCA. So it is changing ARCA even on a tight setup, and it seems across the board that corner entries are the things that have to move around. So overall, between 5 tracks and 2 different oval cars, what did I learn about the oval refresh? I think a couple of the key takeaways is that corner entry is the place where you're gonna have to move around. I think that you really still wanna get to the bottom. It really feels like the bottom isn't like some really bad place to be and you have to search for random lines in the middle. No, there's still no man's land at pretty much every track where running the middle just doesn't really make sense. I think that how you get to the bottom though is what's going to be shifting around, because that late apexing line got really good at some tracks. Getting to the bottom early was really good on the short run, and kind of somewhere in between trying to find grip on entry was the very important thing. There were very few times where I felt like I could roll the middle or I could roll the top successfully. So let me know in the comments below what you think of the oval refresh. What races have you run on it so far? Have you felt anything? Do you really feel more of the same? Let me know. All right, thank you all for watching. Hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you all on the track.